The stars went out on a Tuesday, not all at once, but in a cascading wave that swept across the night sky, each point of light dimming and vanishing, as if someone was slowly drawing a curtain across the heavens. At the Beijing Observatory, Dr. Maya Zhang watched in horror as her instruments registered impossible readings. The stars weren't being blocked, they were being absorbed. "This can't be happening," she whispered, her fingers flying across holographic displays. The quantum telescopes were showing gravitational distortions that defied known physics. Something massive was arriving, its presence so profound it was literally bending space around Earth. The Nexari arrived in ships that weren't ships at all, but rather living segments of space-time, folded and shaped into geometric patterns that hurt human eyes to look at. They appeared simultaneously over every major city on Earth, massive crystalline structures that hummed with frequencies that made dogs howl and babies cry. There was no declaration of war, no demands, no communication at all. The first attack came in the form of a wave that turned every network device on Earth into a receiver for alien code. Smartphones began projecting mysterious symbols. Computer screens displayed fractal patterns that induced seizures in those who looked too long. The global internet fragmented and collapsed within hours. In her underground lab at MIT, Dr. Sarah Chen watched as her quantum computer network detected something extraordinary. The Nexari weren't just attacking Earth's technology. They were trying to rewrite the fundamental laws of physics in localized bubbles around their ships. "They're creating zones where their physics apply instead of ours," she explained to her research team, her voice steady despite the chaos unfolding above. "But look at these patterns. There's a logic to it, a mathematics we might be able to understand." The military response was as swift as it was futile. Fighter jets turned to crystal mid-flight, their pilots trapped in cockpits that had become alien art installations. Nuclear missiles launched at the Nexari ships were caught in temporal bubbles, frozen in eternal detonation, suspended like new constellations above major cities. But humanity's greatest strength has always been its ability to adapt, to find patterns in chaos, to learn from defeat. In the ruins of Silicon Valley, a group of programmers led by Raj Patel discovered that old disconnected technology, devices so simple they were practically antiques, remained unaffected by the Nexari influence. "They can only control what they understand," Raj explained to his growing group of survivors, holding up an ancient Nokia phone. "And they don't understand technology that's inefficient by their standards. They don't understand human improvisation." The first week of the invasion saw the fall of every major government, every military command structure, every digital infrastructure humanity had built. But in basements and bunkers, in abandoned subway tunnels and forgotten Cold War shelters, humans began to gather. They brought with them not just weapons or supplies, but ideas. In London, a teenage girl named Lucy Walsh discovered that playing certain frequencies on analog musical instruments could disrupt Nexari control fields. In Lagos, a retired physics teacher named Dr. Okonjo realized that the crystalline structures the aliens created followed patterns similar to ancient sacred geometry. The Nexari had conquered thousands of worlds before Earth. They had perfected their invasion strategy over millennia, but they had never encountered a species that thrived on chaos, that could find strength in failure, that could turn technological regression into an advantage. 1 month after the stars went out, Dr. Sarah Chen made her first breakthrough. In her underground lab, powered by salvaged solar panels and protected by thick layers of lead and copper that seemed to confuse Nexari sensors, she discovered something remarkable about their technology. They don't just use quantum entanglement for communication, she explained to a gathered group of scientists and survivors. Their entire civilization is one massive quantum network. Every ship, every crystal, every piece of their technology is connected at the subatomic level. It's elegant, it's perfect. She paused, a small smile forming on her lips, and it's their weakness. The Nexari had created an invasion force that was effectively a single organism, every part connected to every other part. They had eliminated individual points of failure by making everything part of a perfect whole. But they had never considered that this perfect synchronization might itself become a vulnerability. As the first month of occupation drew to a close, humanity was not defeated. In hidden places, they were learning, adapting, understanding. The Nexari had expected submission or extinction, the only responses they had ever encountered in their long history of conquest. Instead, they found something entirely new, a species that grew stronger through adversity, that could turn primitive technology into weapons, that could see patterns in chaos. The stars were still hidden, but in the darkness, humanity was beginning to see more clearly than ever before. The real war was just beginning. The old subway tunnels beneath Boston had become a labyrinth of hope. 3 months into the Nexari occupation, Dr. Sarah Chen had transformed an abandoned maintenance station into humanity's most advanced research facility. The irony wasn't lost on her. Their most sophisticated laboratory was powered by salvaged car batteries and decorated with graffiti from the 1980s. "It's beautiful," she said, watching the ancient oscilloscope display patterns captured from Nexari communication frequencies. The green lines danced across the screen, forming complex geometries that seemed to pulse with alien life. Next to her, Raj Patel typed on a laptop so old it still ran Windows XP. "Beautiful and predictable," he replied, his fingers never pausing. "They're so advanced they've forgotten how to be random. Every pattern repeats every 6 hours, down to the microsecond." The breakthrough had come from an unexpected source. Lucy Walsh, the teenage musician from London, had been airlifted to Boston by a network of resistance pilots who specialized in flying aircraft, too old for the Nexari to detect. Her discovery about musical frequencies had proved to be the key to understanding the aliens' quantum communication network. "It's like they're singing," Lucy explained, her fingers moving across an ancient piano keyboard they'd salvaged from a condemned music school. "But their song never changes. They don't improvise." The Nexari occupation had transformed Earth's cities into alien architectural marvels. Crystalline spires reached into the perpetually darkened sky, connected by streams of light that served as both transportation and communication channels. But beneath these glittering monuments to conquest, humanity was building something far more precious, a network of hope. Dr. Okonjo's insights about sacred geometry had spread through the Resistance's shortwave radio network, helping groups around the world identify weak points in Nexari structures. In Sydney, survivors had used this knowledge to establish safe zones where alien influence was minimized. In Moscow, resistance fighters had learned to navigate between the geometric patterns, finding blind spots in the aliens' perfect surveillance. But it was in the tunnels beneath Boston that the true revolution was taking shape. Dr. Chen's team had made a discovery that would change everything. "They're not just connected," she explained to the gathered resistance leaders, her voice echoing off the tunnel walls. "They're dependent on that connection. The Nexari aren't just sharing information. They're sharing consciousness itself." The implications were staggering. The Nexari weren't just an advanced civilization. They were effectively a single organism spread across thousands of ships and millions of crystalline structures. Their technology wasn't just tools. It was extensions of their shared mind. "That's why they can't understand us," Raj added, pulling up displays showing the aliens' repeated pattern behaviors. "They literally can't conceive of individual thought, of random actions, of improvisation. Their strength is their perfect unity, but it's also their weakness." In a corner of the lab, Lucy sat at her piano, playing sequences of notes that matched the alien frequencies. Each chord created subtle disruptions in the Nexari's local network, like static in their perfect symphony. But more importantly, the disruptions were teaching them something crucial about their adversaries. "They can't adapt," Lucy said, her young face serious in the dim light. "When I change the melody, they take exactly 3.8 seconds to adjust. Every time. They don't learn, they just reset." Above ground, The Nexeri continued their methodical transformation of Earth. Their crystalline structures grew like perfect fractals, each expansion precisely calculated, each change part of their grand design. But they remained blind to the chaos brewing beneath their feet. In hidden places around the world, humanity was doing what it had always done best: adapting, improvising, finding strength in diversity rather than uniformity. The resistance wasn't just fighting the Nexari. They were proving that humanity's imperfections, their individuality, their randomness, their ability to create and innovate, were actually their greatest strengths. Maya Jung, now operating from a hidden observatory in the Himalayas, had noticed something else. The perpetual darkness caused by the Nexari's presence was having an unexpected effect on Earth's atmosphere. The physics-altering bubbles they created were starting to interact with Earth's natural magnetic field in ways that even the aliens didn't seem to anticipate. They understand perfect systems, she reported via encrypted shortwave transmission. But Earth isn't perfect. It's chaotic, dynamic, constantly changing. And those changes are starting to affect their technology. The resistance network grew stronger each day, not through central planning or perfect coordination, but through countless individual innovations and adaptations. While the Nexari's unified consciousness made them overwhelmingly powerful, it also made them predictable. Every action, every response, every adaptation followed patterns that humans were learning to recognize and exploit. In her underground lab, Dr. Chen was putting the final touches on a device that would prove her theory. Built from a combination of salvaged electronics and carefully studied Nexari crystalline fragments, it was possibly the most important invention in human history, and it looked like something assembled in a garage. "That's exactly why it will work," she said, smiling at the crude appearance of humanity's greatest hope. "They'll never see it coming because they can't imagine something so imperfect could be a threat." The device was ready. The network was in place. Humanity was about to remind the galaxy that perfection isn't everything. They called it Operation Discord, and it began with a piano concerto. In 50 cities around the world, at exactly the same time, resistance members wheeled old pianos into the streets beneath the Nexari's crystalline towers. Lucy Walsh had trained them all via shortwave radio, teaching them to play specific sequences of notes that matched the aliens' quantum frequencies. The Nexari didn't react at first. Their sensors, designed to detect advanced technology and organized military movements, barely registered the presence of such primitive instruments. That was their first mistake. Now, Dr. Chen's voice crackled through hidden radio receivers, and 50 pianists began to play. The effect was immediate and devastating. The musical frequencies, perfectly matched to the Nexari's quantum communication network, but deliberately played with human imperfection, created a cascade of disruptions through their crystalline structures. The aliens' perfect harmony was being challenged by something they couldn't comprehend: orchestrated chaos. In her Himalayan observatory, Dr. John watched through salvaged telescopes as the Nexari vessels above the cities began to pulse with confused patterns of light. "They're trying to adjust," she reported via the resistance network. "But they can't synchronize their responses because each pianist is playing slightly differently." The piano attack was just the beginning. As the Nexari's network struggled to adapt to the musical disruption, Raj Patel's team launched the second phase of the operation. Thousands of recovered smartphones, reprogrammed with code that mimicked Nexari communication patterns but intentionally included human-style errors, began broadcasting simultaneously. "It's like we're introducing static into their conversation," Raj explained to his team as they monitored the effects. "They can't filter it out because it's too similar to their own signals, but they can't integrate it because it's imperfect." The Nexari's response was both impressive and revealing. Crystalline structures began to shift and reform, trying to establish new communication patterns. But for the first time since their arrival, their movements weren't perfectly synchronized. In some cities, the structures grew chaotically. In others, they appeared to freeze in confusion. Dr. Okonjo, watching from a hidden bunker in Lagos, noticed something extraordinary. "The sacred geometry is breaking down," he reported excitedly. "Their structures are losing cohesion. They're trying to maintain too many different defensive patterns at once." The true genius of Operation Discord wasn't just its use of simple technology to disrupt advanced systems. It was how it exploited the fundamental difference between human and Nexari consciousness. Humans naturally filtered out background noise, adapted to imperfect conditions, found patterns in chaos. The Nexari, with their perfect unified consciousness, had no such ability. But the aliens weren't defeated yet. As their ground structures struggled to maintain coherence, the massive ships above the cities began to pulse with new patterns of light. They were attempting to establish a stronger central control, to override the confusion below with pure computational force. That's when Dr. Chen activated her device. Built from salvaged electronics and studied Nexari crystals, the quantum resonance amplifier looked like something from a mad scientist's garage. Its power source was a combination of car batteries and modified solar panels. Its control system ran on a reprogrammed game console. It was exactly the kind of imperfect, jury-rigged technology that the Nexari couldn't comprehend. They're expecting us to either have primitive technology or copied versions of their advanced technology, Dr. Chen said as she initiated the power-up sequence. They don't understand that we can create something new by combining both. The device began to hum, its salvaged crystals pulsing with a light that was neither fully human nor fully Nexari in nature. It broadcast a signal that was, in essence, a question that the aliens' perfect unified consciousness couldn't resolve, a paradox encoded in their own quantum language. Above the cities, the Nexari ships began to show signs of genuine distress. Their crystalline surfaces rippled with conflicting patterns as they tried to process information that violated their fundamental understanding of reality. The perfect synchronization that made them so powerful was becoming a vulnerability. Resistance teams around the world reported similar effects. The Nexari's control was weakening. Their perfect structures were showing flaws. Their unified consciousness was experiencing something entirely new: doubt. But even as humanity celebrated its first major victory, Dr. Chen noticed something troubling in the quantum readings. The Nexari weren't just being disrupted. They were changing, adapting in a way that suggested they were capable of learning from defeat. Not as quickly or fluidly as humans, but they were learning nonetheless. They're not just a network, she realized, studying the new patterns emerging in their communication. They're evolving. And they're doing it because of us. The war was entering a new phase. Humanity had proven it could fight back, but in doing so, they might have pushed their enemy to evolve beyond their current limitations. The next battle wouldn't just be about disrupting the Nexari's perfect order. It would be a race to see which species could adapt faster. As the crystalline towers above them pulsed with uncertain light, the resistance leaders gathered in their underground bunkers to plan their next move. They had won their first major victory not through superior firepower or advanced technology, but through creativity, improvisation, and the willingness to embrace imperfection. The innovation war, as historians would later call it, was just beginning. And humanity was about to show the galaxy what real evolution looked like. The Nexari's evolution was beautiful and terrifying to watch. Their crystalline structures had begun to pulse with new rhythms, no longer following the perfect 6-hour cycles that had made them so predictable. The alien ships above Earth's cities moved in patterns that showed the first traces of improvisation. "They're learning," Dr. Zhang reported from her Himalayan observatory, her voice tight with concern. "The quantum fluctuations in their ships are showing increasing variance. They're actually starting to mimic our chaos." In the Boston Underground Lab, Dr. Chen studied the new data with a mixture of professional fascination and personal dread. The Nexari were adapting faster than anyone had anticipated, incorporating the very unpredictability that humans had used against them. "But they're still thinking like a collective," Raj pointed out, analyzing the new patterns. "They can simulate chaos, but they can't truly understand it. Look at these sequences. They're still perfectly coordinated across all their ships. They're playing at randomness. Lucy Walsh, now 17 and regarded as one of the Resistance's leading experts on Nexera communication patterns, saw something else in the data. "They're afraid," she said, her fingers moving across her piano keys as she matched the aliens' new frequencies. "These patterns, they're like questions. They're asking themselves something they've never had to consider before." The revelation hit Dr. Chen like a thunderbolt. The Nexeri weren't just adapting their tactics. They were experiencing an existential crisis. Their perfect unified consciousness was grappling with concepts it had never needed to understand: individuality, uncertainty, the value of imperfection. "They're fighting a war on two fronts," she realized, "against us and against their own nature." Around the world, the Resistance was witnessing the effects of this internal conflict. The Nexeri's attempts to mimic human unpredictability were creating weaknesses in their network. Their crystalline structures would sometimes act independently of the collective, creating moments of vulnerability that human fighters were learning to exploit. Dr. Okonjo's team and Legos had developed a new theory about the sacred geometry patterns. "They're not just communication networks," he explained during a global Resistance briefing. "They're consensus builders. The Nexeri need these structures to maintain their unified consciousness. And now that consensus is starting to break down." The opportunity was clear, but so was the danger. A wounded hive mind controlling reality warping technology was potentially more dangerous than a fully functional one. The Resistance needed to strike before the Nexeri could fully adapt to their new state of being. That's when Maya Zhang made the discovery that would change everything. The stars she transmitted from her observatory. They're coming back. The perpetual darkness that had masked Earth's sky since the invasion was beginning to thin. The Nexeri's reality warping field was weakening as their unified consciousness struggled with its evolution. But more importantly, the returning starlight was revealing something extraordinary. "We're not alone in this fight," Maya reported, her voice shaking with excitement. "I'm detecting quantum signatures from other solar systems, hundreds of them. Other civilizations are watching us. Some of them are trying to communicate." The implications were staggering. Earth wasn't just fighting for its own survival. It was showing the galaxy that the supposedly invincible Nexeri could be challenged. Every victory humans scored against the aliens was being observed and studied by other species who had lived in fear of Nexeri invasion. Dr. Chen and her team worked frantically to decode the alien messages. Most were simple observations, but some contained valuable information. The Nexeri had conquered thousands of worlds, but they had never faced a species that forced them to question their fundamental nature. "These other civilizations," Raj said, analyzing the decoded messages, "they all tried to fight the Nexeri by becoming more like them. More unified, more perfect. We're the first ones to make the Nexeri try to become more like us." The Resistance leadership gathered in their hidden bunkers to plan what they hoped would be the final phase of the war. They had learned through their galactic observers that the Nexeri's collective consciousness had a physical center, a massive computational structure hidden within their largest ship. "If we can disrupt that central node," Dr. Chen explained, "we might be able to break their consensus permanently. Not destroy them, but force them to exist as individuals rather than a collective." The plan they devised was audacious. It would require perfect coordination between Resistance cells worldwide, while simultaneously being completely unpredictable to the Nexeri's increasingly sophisticated analysis. Lucy sat at her piano, surrounded by ancient synthesizers and modern quantum sensors. "We'll need a new kind of music," she said, "something that follows mathematical rules but can never be predicted, like jazz, but written in their quantum language." Dr. Okonjo and his team began mapping weak points in the Nexeri's geometric networks, identifying nodes where their consensus was already starting to fray. Maya Zhang coordinated with their hidden alien observers, preparing to use their quantum signatures as additional disruption sources. But it was Raj who provided the final piece of the puzzle. "We don't need to attack their central node directly," he said, showing them his analysis. We just need to give each ship, each crystal, each piece of their network a different question to answer. Their perfect consensus will do the rest. As the Resistance prepared for their final offensive, the Nexeri ships above continued their evolution. Their once perfect crystalline surfaces now rippled with chaotic patterns, beautiful but increasingly unstable. They had learned to mimic human unpredictability, but that variability was destroying the perfect unity that had made them unbeatable. The stage was set for a battle that would determine not just Earth's fate, but the future of consciousness itself in the galaxy. Humanity had shown that imperfection could be a strength. Now they would prove that true adaptation meant more than just mimicking your enemy's tactics. It meant being willing to become something entirely new. They called it Operation Counterpoint, and it began in silence. Around the world, Resistance members waited in their positions, each holding instruments ranging from ancient violins to salvaged quantum resonators. In her Himalayan observatory, Maya John watched the Nexeri ship's pulse with increasingly erratic patterns. The aliens knew something was coming, but their evolving consciousness couldn't predict what. "Remember," Dr. Chen's voice crackled through the Resistance network, "we're not trying to destroy them. We're trying to set them free." The attack began with a single note from Lucy Walsh's piano in the Boston Underground. The sound, carried through both air and quantum channels, was a question encoded in the Nexeri's own language. "Who are you when you are alone?" The effect was immediate. The nearest crystalline structure vibrated in response, its perfect surfaces showing ripples of confusion. Then, precisely 30 seconds later, a different note played from Lagos, carrying another question. "Why do you fear chaos?" One by one, at seemingly random intervals that actually followed a complex mathematical pattern developed by Raj, Resistance members around the world began their part of the symphony. Each note, each sound, each quantum pulse carried a different philosophical paradox, a different challenge to the Nexeri's unified consciousness. Above them, the alien ships began to move in increasingly chaotic patterns. Their attempts to maintain consensus were visible in the waves of light that passed between them, but each new question, each new paradox, forced them to process conflicting information. "It's working," Maya reported, watching through her instruments. "The quantum signatures, they're starting to differentiate. Each ship is developing its own unique frequency." In the crystalline structures below, the effect was even more dramatic. The perfect geometric patterns began to shift and change, each structure responding differently to the barrage of questions. Some grew more complex, while others simplified. Some brightened, while others dimmed. Dr. Okonjo's voice came through the network. "The sacred geometry is breaking down, but not in the way we expected. They're not just losing pattern, they're developing individual patterns." This was the true genius of Operation Counterpoint. Instead of trying to destroy the Nexeri's network, they were forcing it to evolve beyond its original limitations. Each paradox, each question, each musical note was designed not to break their consciousness, but to expand it. Through quantum channels, messages from watching civilizations poured in. Other species that had lived in fear of the Nexeri were witnessing something they had thought impossible. The perfect hive mind was fragmenting not into chaos, but into a harmony of individual consciousness. In orbit, the massive central ship that housed the Nexeri's computational core began to pulse with unprecedented patterns. The aliens were experiencing true individuality for the first time in their species' history. The effect cascaded through their network, each node, each ship, each crystal beginning to resonate with its own unique frequency, while maintaining a more complex kind of connection. "They're changing," Lucy whispered, her fingers still moving across the piano keys. "The music, they're starting to improvise with us." She was right. The Nexeri structures were no longer just responding to the human symphony. They were joining it. Each crystal, each ship began to add its own notes to the composition. What had started as an attack had transformed into something unprecedented. The first true collaboration between human and Nexeri consciousness. The stars grew brighter overhead as the reality warping field continued to weaken, but it didn't disappear entirely. Instead, it transformed, becoming more subtle, more nuanced. The Nexeri weren't abandoning their technology. They were learning to use it with greater sophistication and individual expression. Dr. Chen's instruments showed something remarkable. The quantum network isn't breaking. It's evolving. They're maintaining connection without requiring consensus. They're learning to be both one and many. The final phase of the operation was perhaps the most daring. As the Nexeri consciousness evolved, humanity offered them a choice. Through their quantum channels, they transmitted the complete record of human history, their triumphs and failures, their art and science, their endless capacity for both creation and destruction. Show them who we really are, Dr. Chen had said when proposing this part of the plan. Not just our strength, but our flaws. Not just our unity, but our diversity. Let them understand what they've been fighting. The response came not in words or quantum signals, but in action. The crystalline structures began to retract, not in retreat, but in transformation. The perpetual darkness lifted as the ships moved into higher orbits. Earth's cities were slowly released from alien control, the geometric patterns dissolving not into ruin, but into new forms that blended Nexeri precision with human creativity. From the watching civilizations came waves of astonishment and hope. They were witnessing not just the end of a war, but the birth of something entirely new. The Nexeri, the great unifiers of consciousness, had been unified with something greater than themselves. The understanding that true unity comes not from enforced consensus, but from the harmony of different voices. As dawn broke over Boston for the first time since the invasion, Dr. Chen stood in the open air, watching the transformed crystalline structures catch the sunlight. Next to her, Lucy continued to play, her music now part of a greater symphony that included both human and alien compositions. "We didn't just survive," Dr. Chen said, looking up at the ships that now hung in orbit like new constellations. "We showed them a better way to live." In the years that followed, Earth became something unprecedented in the galaxy, a place where individual consciousness and collective connection found new ways to coexist. The Nexeri, changed forever by their encounter with humanity, became not conquerors but collaborators, their technology transformed by the understanding that imperfection and chaos were not flaws to be corrected, but sources of strength to be embraced. And in hidden places around the world, the pianos and violins that had helped save humanity were preserved, not just as monuments to victory, but as reminders that the most powerful weapon in the universe isn't force or technology or even perfect unity. It's the ability to change, to adapt, to find harmony in discord, and to grow beyond what you were meant to be.